Today is July 5th, one day after a certain celebrity tweeted out on July 4th the following message. He tweeted, "We must now realize the promise of America by trusting God, unifying our vision, and building our future. I am running for the President of the United States." I can certainly understand his desire to do so. I can even understand maybe where he's coming from. And while I do make no claims to either side of the aisle or promotion of any particular candidate, I must say that I am intrigued by his statement. It does appeal to me in a very simplistic point of view. But I often wonder if people sometimes miss the reality of what we are doing with our politics. You see, it seems like we have this view that change starts at the top and then spreads down. And we get that one leader in the top point, then it trickles all down, down to the low guy. And that seems to have been a view that we've had for the last, 20 years or so. Yet when I look at the track record of these last 20 years, I must admit they've pretty much all been failures. We've tried to legislate morality. We've tried to push things onto people. And it seems like people are just stubborn. They don't want to hear it. They don't want to know it. They don't want to examine it. They don't want to own it. Fundamental reality, I think, is that what we have seen is that moralistic change in our morality, change in our behavior, change in the way we do things, that's always got to start at the bottom and work its way up. It can never start at the top and work its way down. We have here before us this morning an opportunity to examine some scripture that I think deals maybe a little bit with the how-to. How do we get a change that this celebrity wants to promote, a change that he's hoping for, a change that he, quite frankly, is appealing to the Almighty for? How do we get there? How do we get ourselves to that point? Well, this is the change. The change that he's talking about is a change of heart, a change of attitude, a change of mindset of all people, of everyone. So how do we get there? There's the question. How do we get there? If it's not from the top, it's got to come from the bottom. But how do we do it? How do you and I do it? How do we collectively make the changes that he's hoping for? There's a good question. But the answer, I think, is found in the Bible already. A prophet named Micah, I think, answered that. It's a short little Bible verse we'll look at this morning. The Bible verse is found in Micah chapter 6, verse 8. It's one of those things that is memorized quite a bit. It's a fairly well-known Bible verse. Very simple, very easy to understand, very hard to live out. Very hard to live out. Micah 6:8, it's a very profound statement, and it talks like this. So if you will, you can turn with me to Micah chapter 6, verse 8. And it's just real quick like it says the following. It says, "Mankind, he has told you what is good, and what it is the Lord requires of you. To act justly, to love faithfulness, and to walk humbly with your God." We see right there just three main things, 3 main points that, quite frankly, Micah makes. That says this is what God wants. 3 main points: to act justly, to love faithfulness, and to walk humbly with God. So I want to look at those this morning, but first let's just address 2 things. The first one is that when we read this passage, it says that God is the one that has told us what is good. It says, verse 8 there, the first part of it, it says, "He has told you what is good." God is the one that tells us what is good. He's the definition of good. He's the one that tells us what that standard is. Okay, it's not you, it's not me, it's not society, it's not a collective bargaining unit. No, what it is God. He has an absolute moralistic viewpoint that we have to understand is the right thing to do. There is no other. God is the ultimate judge. As soon as we understand that, and we understand that God's the one who did it, and God's the one giving it to us, it says right here that he has told you. God is the one that's told you not only what is good, but he's also the one that told you what is good. In other words, he set the standard, and then he tells you what the standard is. What is that standard? Well, glad you asked. That standard happens to be found right here. Yeah, this is the standard. The whole thing. And you know what? It's really easy to read. It is. Easy to do, but very hard to do. You see, we can read it. We can hear it. We can go to church all the time. But living it out, that's where it gets difficult. That's where it gets difficult. God has shown it to us. He has given us the standard, and then he's told us what that standard is. And it's very interesting, however, that he starts it off with the word mankind. He basically says, hey, guess what? He says, this is who it's to. It's to mankind. It's not to the snakes on the ground and the lizards and the reptiles and beasts of the field and the birds of the air. No, it's to mankind. The people made in his image. Men, women, old, young, all of us. The standard is the same. It's written to mankind. And it's very interesting that it's so simple. What he says, the following 3 points, that even a 3-year-old can understand it. And it's that simple. And it's so complex and so hard to do. And even the one who's been on the earth and walked the closest with God still struggles to deal with. Simple to understand, but hard to do. The 3 things that he talks about right here, to act justly is the first one. That's a tough one. You see, justice it can be defined as rendering to all their due according to the relation and obligation to them. Rendering to all their due according to the relation and obligation to them. That's what justice is. It's a simple thing. It really is. Justice, we often tend to think, though, is something that is kind of like the form of the legal system, right? The guy robs a bank, he gets caught, he gets sentenced to jail, and everyone says justice has been served. Well, that's a small part of it, I think. Yes, absolutely. But I think justice goes beyond that. Justice goes into everyday living. Justice is something that we carry with us at all times. A good example of this would be going to the grocery store, right? Where you slide your bag of goods across the barcode scanner, right? It rings up a price. The cashier tells you how much it is, and you pay him, right? Okay, there's a transaction. It's just, it's fair, it's even, it's equal, right? You put your money, and they give you goods. It's an equal trade. That's kind of what justice is. It means you're paying them what's due. You owe something for that, so you pay it, and they give it to you in return. That's a just transaction. That's what we call by justice. Now, what's not justice is, slide it down. The guy takes one look at you and says, you know what? I don't like the way you're doing your hair today, so I'm going to charge you double. That's not justice. No. Nor is it justice. It comes down, he rings it up, and you look at him and say, I don't like the way you're doing your hair. So I'm going to pay you half. That's not justice either. Justice is something that is equally balanced. It's something that you do that's even. It's given all their due according to their relation and obligation to them. In other words, we're called to have if you will, a perspective that says everything is fair. Easy to do, right? I mean, easy to understand, and we all would agree with it in principle, no doubt. But, however, we have a problem. We have a major problem. You see, sometimes our justice system is a little off. Don't believe me? No, we make a lot of judgmental calls. We look at things and we're not, so unbiased by them. We're not. We just kind of run with it and our head runs wild. You see the beggar on the side of the street and you think, man, if only he could get his act together. We have no idea his background. We have no idea what he's been through, what he's done. We got no idea how the heck we're supposed to, help him, for that matter. But yeah, we're making a judgment call thinking that he's doing it to himself. He's getting his just rewards. That's a bag of goods that's going down the conveyor belt and being scanned, and we're giving him a quarter of what it's worth. We don't know. We're making a judgment call on a man and his life. We don't know. That's the point. Justice is something that we do on a daily basis. It's not just, being honest at the grocery store. It's not just being even with our friends. It's everything that we do. Justice is supposed to be there. Love, justice. In other words, it's supposed to be on an even playing field, an equal, even playing field. We are not promoting one person over another on the basis of anything. That shoe fits both feet, okay? I'm going to be honest with you when I say that. And that you can't say that we have one side of a race saying, hey, I need to pick me up, and the other side saying, well, I need it too, but I'm not going to get it because of my skin color. Okay, that's not justice. Justice is even together at the same time. You're supposed to give all their due according to the relation and obligation to them. In other words, whatever we owe them, we're supposed to pay them, and we have to pay them evenly. Okay, that's what justice. The first thing that God wants out of all humanity is justice. An even treatment of everybody. Because that's what they're due. Every last person is due some ounce of respect because they are made in the image of God. Every last person is due some ounce of respect because they are made in the image of God. Justice. That's what we're called to do. We are called to act justly. Second thing he says, though, is to, quite frankly, love faithfulness. Other translations will say mercy, or other even will use the word grace there. The actual word is chesed. I may be butchering the pronunciation of that word, but the meaning is an obligation to the community in relation to relatives, friends, guests, etc. Unity, translated unity, solidarity, loyalty, faithfulness, and sometimes even mercy. So it's understood that this word carries a little different of a understanding and a little different, if you will, of an important factor. You see, in justice, we see it's a physical thing that we do. It's something that we control and something that we do on an active basis. It's how we respond to situations. It's how we handle how we look at people. And this one says to love faithfulness or mercy or grace. It seems to indicate that with all of this, it's relation to a community. It kind of talks a little bit there, I think, of a relationship. This values the relationship a little more than being right or wrong. In other words, quite frankly, it kind of answers the question of what do I do when I've been unjustly treated? See, we've been called to be just. Something's going to happen someday when I won't be treated justly. How do I respond? God says here through the prophet Micah that we are called to love mercy or to love faithfulness. Interesting word. Because basically it's kind of like one of those things where it just says, hey, guess what? We have to understand that the relationship sometimes comes more important than being right or wrong. A good example of this, I think, is marriage relationship. When the husband and the wife, and there's going to be problems. I can guarantee you there will be problems at some point. There's going to be an argument. There's going to be a fight. There's going to be something that comes up, a disagreement of some sorts. And the fundamental reality is going to be somebody is right and possibly somebody is wrong. It's quite possible there are two parties with just differing opinions on the matter, and neither right or wrong. But somehow that argument, that disagreement has to come to an end. Someone has to realize that the relationship is more important than being right. And that's usually what happens. Someone realizes that, and someone says, okay, I'm done. This is not where we're going, where I want it to go. A relationship matters. A relationship matters. It's very interesting here that we have this word to love mercy, to love faithfulness, to love grace, as some translations will use. It talks to relation to relatives, to friends, to guests. This is what it's talking about, to love these things. And we're supposed to embrace these relationships so much so that we're not putting those in the spot in a situation where we are right and we know we're right, and therefore we're going to stand on our rights and we're going to argue our rights and we're going to be right regardless of the cost. No, it's taking a step away from that and saying the relationship's more important. The relationship is more important. We're called to love mercy. We're called to be just, and we're called to love mercy. In other words, overlook what the other person's doing. It's real funny because I think it calls to mind the second greatest commandment. It says, love your neighbor as yourself. Or as Paul would put it later, every one of us needs to put the needs of others before the needs of ourselves. That's where we're going. That's what I think the prophet here is trying to say, is like, put other people before yourself. It just really calls to mind, and it cements that loving your neighbor as yourself. And we are doing this firstly by our actions, and secondly by our responses when the unjust stuff happens to us. So we see we have to called to be just. We're called to love mercy. We're called to also walk humbly with God. And that's a very interesting phrase right there, walk with the Lord. The word walk can be translated kind of as an idea of to go, to come, or to walk. It carries an idea, I guess, of current traveling. In other words, leaving from where you once were and then going to where you are going to, or heading there. It carries that idea of traveling, if you will. You've left your former spot and you're moving towards a different spot. We are called to walk with God. We are called to walk with God, which kind of tells me that it's not God necessarily coming to our walk. It's not saying that God walks with us, which would be probably a true statement, but it carries the wrong meaning. We're called to walk with Him. And I think the reason for that is very simple. Because on one hand, we have God, who is almighty, all-powerful, perfect, holy, and just. And then we got us, and we're not perfect, we're not holy, we're not just, we're humans. We screw up. To err is to human, right? And so why would God want to come and walk alongside this bag of mess that we are? Instead, I think we're called to move towards God. Now, there is a fundamental reality here that I think it speaks to, and that is, there's a big gulf between mankind and God, a huge, huge gulf, caused by man, quite frankly. Go back to the Garden of Eden. You can go ahead and read in the book of Genesis, and it really talks, about what we did and where we've come from, and ever since then, it's just gone downhill, right? That chasm seems to get wider and wider and wider and wider. Just go ahead and look at our society today. But a long time ago, God said He was going to fix the problem. He told Eve that. And He did, through His Son, Jesus Christ, who came to this earth as a human, died on the cross, rose again, and gave us the hope of an eternal life. That kind of brought the chasm a lot closer, and suddenly it could be fixed, and suddenly it could be traversed. We could cross over it to God's standard. God's standard is holiness. That's what God lives for. That's what God is. That is who He is. It's very fundamental in His nature of who God is. He is a holy God. And it means that when we say we are called to walk humbly with Him, I think that indicates that we are walking from a life of sin, a life of despair, a life of evil, and we are walking towards that holiness. It means we are traveling away from our old lifestyle. It gives that picture here of us leaving the lifestyle that we once had, that lifestyle that was very displeasing to the Almighty, and moving towards one that is closer in line with God. We're humans. We're going to make mistakes. We're going to keep doing it. And He knows that. He's a forgiving God. Very simple put. He is a very forgiving God, a loving God, but He still has a standard. And that standard is holiness. And that's why we have to go from our former self, and we got to walk with God, walk to God, walk away from ourselves and walk alongside God. So I think that's where the first aspect it talks about. And I think to illustrate this is the idea of when we walk with God, I think He finds it, quite frankly, a good thing. He finds it pleasing. A good example of that would be Enoch, found in Hebrews 11:5, where it's interpreted his walking with God was found to be pleasing to God. And I think that's a perfect example for you and me. The closer we are and the closer we walk with God, I think the more pleasing it is to Him. It's just that simple. And the closer we are to Him, the more holy we become. We're always going to fall short. It's part of humanity's curse. But the fundamental reality is we are called to walk alongside a holy God. And that's the goal. That's the standard. That's where we should go. In all of our lives, we must conform ourselves to the will of God and keep our communion with Him and study to approve ourselves to Him in our integrity. That's what Matthew Henry had to say about the matter. And I tend to agree with him. We have to move everything about us over to him. The second one is word I want to look at there is humbly, because it's fine to walk with God, but here it says we got to walk humbly with him. Humble is an interesting word because it kind of means to be modest. It kind of means the opposite of pride. It kind of means not thinking very highly of yourself. We use the word humble quite a bit. Humbly apologize. We feel humbled when something happens. When you're so proud and you're so happy, and then suddenly something happens and brings you low. You say you've been humbled. Another phrase we might use is eating crow or things along those lines. But here, the word humble talks about a realization of who we are in comparison to who God is. Okay, who we are in comparison to who God is. We're not that great. We're not. If you don't believe me, go try parting the Red Sea. Go for it. We're not great. We're not good. We're not powerful. We're not perfect. We all screw up. We all make mistakes. But nonetheless, we have to realize that. And we have to realize we are not God's gift to humanity. We have to realize that we are not anything without him. We have to rely on God to help us in every situation. If we try doing things on our own, things will fall flat. Things will come apart at the seams. It won't be a good thing. Every thought within us must be brought down low. That's hard to do because we take great pride in things we've done. We've accomplishments. At work, you've done a good job. You think you're great. We can't think that way. We have to be brought down low. We have to think that we're not that great. Our job, our work, our walk in life, our bank account numbers, how many people we've done, how many church services we've attended, whatever it is that we're taking pride in, we are called to humble ourselves and realize those don't matter. When we walk with God, we got to realize who he is and realize that there's nothing that we can bring to the table. There is absolutely nothing worthwhile I can bring to the table. It doesn't matter about all my good deeds. It doesn't matter how many old ones I've helped cross the street. It doesn't matter how many good deeds I've done, how many souls I've led to the Lord. None of that matters. Because when I walk humbly with God, I realize he is holy and he is perfect and I am not. So we see the three things that God tells us in order to do what is good and to do what he desires for us to do is to do justice, to love, faithfulness, or mercy, to walk humbly with the Lord. Those three things. And those are the three things I think that answer the question of, how do we start a grassroots revolution, and one that starts affecting everybody across the board, across the nation, from the down and then possibly going up. How do we start this, if you will, this revival? Well, that's what we looked at this morning. To do justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with God. Those are the three steps. Those are the three things we can do. And as we look at another year of our nation, because, we only have 364 days until another Independence Day, I think it's a good time for us to start. A good time for us to start reaching out to our family, our friends, our communities. Start reaching out to them in this manner. In the manner that says we're going to do justice. We're going to do what is right all the time. We're going to walk humbly with God. We're going to be forgiving. We're going to put that relationship out there. We're going to love mercy. All these things need to be evident in our lives in order to realize that dream that we're going to make America great again. That's what it's going to take. It's going to take a grassroots level. It's going to take people on the bottom. It's going to take you. It's going to take me. And we're going to have to follow God's mandate in order to fix that change. We have to be the change that we wish to see in our nation. It's just that simple. And remember that change happens when we follow God's commands.